All right. I'm Ben Harris here with Bob Ley for Clarity Stripe. Now, Bob, thank you so much for
Sure.
joining me here today. It's just a pleasure to speak to you.
It's good. It's good to see you again. I'm looking forward to this.
All right. Well, then let's get right into this quick Q&A. First question I got for you. Do you believe that this continuation of professional and eventually over time things got figured out, but collegiate sports through the pandemic has been a successful one?
I don't know how you're going to define success. If you define success by the NFL model of they got every game in, yeah, even though the salary hit took what, an $18 million hit. If you define success as in with the collegiate model, as you and I are speaking, the bubble is extant, and of course, what's been revealed with the disparity of the way the women have been treated in San Antonio versus Indianapolis, and the way that I think that protocols and the whole amateur student model up against the way the entire student body has been looked after and treated, I think there are a lot of questions. So, everyone has a different metric for success. Everything is measured against one thing in this country: money. Okay, so the games will get played, the games will get televised. But baseball last year had this bastardized season, and which exposed the bigger problem coming down the line for baseball, which is the reinflammation of all their labor problems. The NBA played successfully in the bubble while managing the the social justice movement and having that dialogue with the players. So on balance, yes, but I mean, if you ask, it's probably been one of the more perceived to be successful aspects of society functioning, far better than public education. But there have been enough other questions raised about it that I think are going to linger and are going to demand answers going forward.
Right. I think the question is like, while yes, you can call it a success in that they were able to kind of complete their goal of either finishing seasons, starting and then finishing seasons, but like whether or not it's the right thing to have done, and these discrepancies between how pro sports athletes and collegiate athletes have been treated through these times and processes is you can see mass differences and stuff like that.
Well,
So
it's all, there's how will we look back in 15 years? It's going to take 10 to 15 years where I think, and hopefully I'm around to be part of that conversation, or at least listening to it. What did the pandemic of 2020, 2021 do to American society, the conventions of society? How did it change us as a people, as a society? There were advances, there were probably more detriments. But they're going to look back. If you want to just take a 100, a Twitter-esque look back at the NFL, even as we're doing now from several months, they played all the games. The NCAA played both tournaments. Baseball handed out a World Series trophy. It's only when you get down to the finer print, when you get down to the analytical thinking, when you get down to the nuance and to a large take, which is, there's the Justin Turner incident on the field at the end of the World Series. There's all the things we just talked about with the NCAA tournament. So if you're gambling appropriately with that now throughout sports, if you're gambling that history is only going to want to look at the broad strokes, at the bold type, games got played, money got made. Okay, games got played and money got made. But there are other things.
Of course. Now, moving on to kind of your involvement with the Hall. Obviously, you were a local boy, so that played into your decision making. But what specifically?
I lived at home. You got to remember, back in the 70s, it was a commuter school.
Right.
Primarily, it was a 3/4 commuter school.
Yeah, and that local, and I mean, even today, I when I came all the way from Ohio to here, and like I saw a lot of on-campus students and stuff, but I still to this day have a ton of friends that commute now, of course, mid-pandemic, even more that go remotely. So it's definitely been a strange experience. But what specifically about the offerings and programs at Seton Hall when you were making your decision kind of drew you in?
It's a real easy answer. 89.5 FM. Living in Bloomfield, 8-10 miles away, dabbling in a which I can now reveal to be a pirate radio station unlicensed by the FCC when I was in high school, into sports, into play-by-play, having an interest. enjoying music, total Beatles freak. Remember watching their first show on Sullivan in 1964. All of that music and the student-run station and hearing it and understanding, raised a Catholic and Roman Catholic University, and looking, I only applied. It was take all our viewers back. Oh my God, 50 years when I'm looking at colleges. There was no such thing as a Common App. There's no such thing as Zoom and computers. You had a postage stamp, and you applied. I applied to one school, and Seton Hall accepted me. But it was primarily Seton Hall recruited me at 89.5 megahertz, and I got there. And back then, and I think I've told this story before. Orientation was in August, maybe 3-4 weeks before classes began, and so I showed up at the radio station on the first day of orientation. I walked into the control room in Walsh. This is the old SOU that bears no relation to the Starship Enterprise that is there now. And Frank Scafidi, who is now the chief engineer, who succeeded the late beloved Tom Parnham as the chief engineer at the time. Frank was, I think, a sophomore. He was a rising junior. Was on the board. I introduced myself, an incoming freshman. Within 20 minutes, he had me sitting at the board, hitting carts, running brakes, and I'm running I couldn't sign the log because I didn't have my third endorsed. My license. And so I wasn't even in class yet. And that was setting the tone for the next 4 years, which was basically, it was my home away from home at a radio station, making friendships that endure to this day, 50 years later, many close friends. And it was, especially if you were a commuting student and you worked at SOU was your base of operations. Go there in the morning, drop your books, leave your lunch, whatever, and go to your classes, come back there. Maybe go to the student center. And then, of course, then there was and you might find this hard to believe, that back in the 70s, when the drinking age was actually 18, there was a pub on campus in the basement.
Right, where the Cove is, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I guess that's where it was. And so there were bad ideas even in the 70s that were acted upon. But that was it. SOU was the hub of my social existence at Seton Hall. And of course, it expanded out from there to the classrooms.
Yeah, I totally relate to that experience, being that I came on my visit and I walked knowing that I kind of wanted to go into media in some capacity. And then I walked through the halls of SOU and I was just like, okay, this is somewhere I can totally end up making my home. And I definitely have there, and PTV and other organizations. So the student media outlets at Seton Hall are just, they offer incredible experiences in my experience.
I mean, if student run the radio station, even in the days when I was there as sports director and program director, and you had entree and access to jobs in what we call the real world. So that during my senior year, I had followed a track of working others in front of me. I was actually working part-time weekends at WOR Radio in New York City. As the production manager, basically. I'm 21 years old, and I'm in charge of the radio station at night. And other guys I went to college with, went to the hall with, were working as relief engineers. It again, early, barely 2021, and we had this pipeline to the so-called real world. And it was, others were working for the Associated Press up in Morris County or in Newark, various newspapers. And you had that ability. I mean, I did get a good piece of advice from, I forget exactly who, I think the assistant dean of students. I wish I could recall her name. And she did say, don't forget to have fun as you are in college. And at the time, you're trying to go 100 miles an hour to get a good professional start. And you say, I'll get around to it. But yeah, that is good advice. But and now, of course, the internship program is so formalized and so effective, and it's, aided by the alumni network and by our geographic, location. It's far more advanced than what was there when I was a student. So all of this is there for you.
Yeah, and I can't thank the opportunities on campus more for everything I've been able to do personally, and I'm sure everyone, including yourself, has kind of a similar tale of, I was able to do these incredible things at this young age, but it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of your time. But in the end, I know I'm gonna look back on it and just relish every moment. But kind of on that same note, you've had the opportunity as of late, much to the pleasure of myself and other sports media students here at the Hall, to be involved with things like SHU Sports Showcase discussions and calling the St. John's game with
That was
WSU
fun.
last year.
That was
Yeah.
fun. I want to apologize for a little noise out here. We got the windows open where I live down here in the South today. So I think they're picking the garbage up. But yeah, that was calling the St. John's game. I was a nervous wreck because I had done radio play-by-play for basketball. You do highlights. And when you get a shot sheet and you're doing the highlights cold, you haven't seen them yet. It's essentially doing play-by-play. But to do it, and to call it from the baseline, because the SAU guys don't have a great vantage point there. It's, a commercial station gets the better seats, and that's certainly understandable. But I spent a couple of weeks learning the team, looking at St. John's tapes, and that was so much fun. And guys just treated me, and all the women at SOU and associated with that day. That was so neat. I had the time of my life.
Yeah, and kind of with like all these opportunities for you to get back amongst Seton Hall discussions and sports media conversations, what's it kind of meant to you personally to be able to tap into your pirate roots in this fashion?
Well, it's been extremely meaningful because I think you're able to do help as what I call the retail level. You're able to talk one-on-one, to answer questions, speaking at Professor Schechter's classes or some of the panels that we've been able to put together, our 3-part panel that we did for the Sports Media Speaker Series during Black History Month, our show with presentation with Bob Costas back in November 2019. I mean, to be able to put that out there for students to take advantage of, to ask questions, to be exposed, to maybe be inspired, and to see it in their faces, and to see the excitement and enthusiasm, that means a great deal, because we all need something that will just boot us up to that next level of interest, of enthusiasm, and of and ambition. I like to think I'm not done learning what I need to know about I still call it my current profession, because I spend a couple of hours a day, reading in and staying current and working and whatnot. And so the day that you think you've learned it all, danger, Will Robinson.
Definitely. And I think that being able to kind of take a step back and look at everything that's happening and kind of be able to evaluate from a larger perspective what's going on and be able to have big discussions about what's going on, especially in a field that you have so much experience with and so much knowledge of, is very important to kind of help future professionals that are going into it. And I can't thank you enough for the contribution.
Oh, that's very kind of
like this and ones like we just talked about.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And why this moment in time is so, I think, ripe with opportunity is that the very meaning of the term journalism has been deconstructed, reconstructed, torn apart, re-examined, and maybe reconstructed in front of our eyes in the last 5 years. And, there's no wall between journalism and sports journalism. If you're a sports journalist, you're a journalist. You have the same tenets, the same, hopefully rules and standards and self-examination that everybody else should have. And we've seen, total lack of trust in the media in this country. Some of it's self-inflicted on occasion, a lot of it's self-inflicted. We've seen the injection of opinion, of narrative overtaking facts. All of that happens in news, and it happens in sports. And the two are the same. The social justice movement. As you and I are speaking, I'm a couple of days doing the panel at the Villanova School of Law with several other people talking about the social justice movement in sports. And once again, the power of the narrative. Well, does it apply? And are you smart and courageous enough to deconstruct things? All of that has happened in the last few years. And for people coming into the profession and studying the profession and wanting to learn about it, I think it's an exciting time, because you have a chance. Our generation is kind of spent. We've taken the baton. We're on the 4th leg. So the next leg is going to take over on this relay, and it's your generation. And hopefully they'll do so. You guys and ladies will do so with the value system and the enthusiasm that are required, understanding. And I think we have to understand, people of my generation, that things have changed. But there are certain bedrock realities that have to remain: fairness and context and whatnot. But the whole distribution model has changed. How people get their news. I mean, my wife and I quite often will turn on the TV for the first, well, now that the presidency has changed hands, for the first time at 9 o'clock at night. As we're not hiding under the sheets wondering if they're, the big one's about to explode in the day. What my point is, you've got your news on your phone, you've got in any other, your tablet, whatever, and you're not necessarily watching over-the-air television. You're streaming, and you have, oh my gosh, how many choices do you have for content? And it's another reason why distinguished content, smart content, whether it's entertainment, whether it's scripted, whether it's realism, whether it's a documentary, whatever it is, if it's smart and it's good, there's a thirst for it. If you add up what all the streaming services are paying for content per year, I suspect you're approaching $18 to $20 billion.
Yeah.
Invested every year in content. So people want stuff. And if part of that desire for stuff is good journalism, good storytelling, compelling stories, then those that have learned the profession are in a great shape.
And kind of as you just said, the sports media industry is constantly changing. But was there anything about the sports media industry that you wish that you knew when you were first entering it? Like anything that took you by surprise in a good or bad way?
Not really. I think the one thing I learned early on when I was working overnights at WR Radio and working with John A. Gambling, who was the middle son of the gambling triumvirate of gamblings who had that radio show from the 1920s all the way into this century, was that working with I'm 20, 21-year-old kid, and here's this Hall of Fame radio broadcaster, treated me like an equal, was a regular guy. And you learn very early on that people are people. You know who I just heard talking about this just today when I was out working out, listening to a podcast, Alec Baldwin's podcast, which I highly recommend, was talking to Amanda Knox. Remember the woman who was accused and twice convicted in Italy of murdering her roommate. And finally, after spending 4 years in jail and 10 years under the heel of the Italian criminal justice system, was finally exonerated, lives now in the States. But she had something rather propitious to say, which is that people have to understand that these figures they see on their screens and on their devices, these public figures are human beings with every foible, with every character trait. They're just like us. And it's easy to forget that, even for those of us in the business. And I think I tried to learn that early on. And if you deal with people, the way you want to be dealt with, for the most part, that's a formula for success. As far as the overall business in sports, I mean, I was very fortunate to work for a company for the better part of 40 years that was the great disruptor in that. That when ESPN started in 1979, back when the world was, all in black and white, Lincoln was still alive and there were dinosaurs on the earth. There were 3 networks that did sports 2 days a week. And then this little company in Connecticut comes along, and within 10 years or within 8 years, it had rights to the NFL and cable, which is now in decline, but cable at the time was on the ascendance. Cable had reshaped the reality. So the entire model had been blown up in less than a decade. Then came the golden age of ESPN through the 90s into this century, and then came cord cutting. And so all of these, the smart people, and they're a lot smarter than me, and there are many of them who can see beyond the horizon and see the next trends. Those are the ones that will know where we're going and how the next change will happen. Because if anybody tells you for certainty that they knew 5 years ago that this is where we would be today in 2021, then show me their lotto ticket for tomorrow.
Yeah, especially with how rapidly technology has advanced through, specifically for broadcast journalism and internet journalism. It's created a landscape that's completely unpredictable, and I think that's having to overcome things that you can't expect is an unfortunate situation that everyone is in.
Well, there's that, but it's also it's exploiting the new technologies as they come as best you can. It's trying to get in front of it. if
Yeah.
people are cord cutting.
Being able to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, everybody says podcasts are it now. I have my doubts because I think, if you were to stop 100 people on the street, 87 of them have podcasts,
Right. Like
and 3 of them
podcasts.
make money.
Right. People think that podcasts are big now, but no, podcasts were actually big 5-6 years ago, and
Yeah.
now just it's oversaturated.
When Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen have the onions to call themselves the Renegades,
Yeah.
I answer that with one question: when's the last time either of them flew commercial?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're real renegades.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a pretty low ceiling to what that the new ground that podcast is going to plumb.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't call it a money grab, but others have.
Mm-hmm. Now, kind of throughout your career, you were able to bring some of the most important stories in sports to the public eye via Outside the Lines. What kind of current figures within sports media and journalism do you think are doing some of the best and most important work out there?
Well, I still E60 and the OTL folks at ESPN continue to do distinguished and important work. I mean, Mark Fainaru-Wada and Steve Fainaru had a story, I think it was back in December, just had occasion to read it again, about how the NBA officials in China, and especially in the region near where the Uyghurs are held in a concentration camp in Western China, the complaints about abuse and physical abuse and whatnot among students and players in this training facility were well known. The point being, the greater point being that the NBA was on notice. What did the NBA know? When did they know it? And It didn't take Daryl Morey to blow the whistle. And even after Daryl Morey, there were things there that had to be answered for. The Athletic is a go-to outlet for smart writing. I mean, I miss, yes, sitting down and watching a well-produced piece, but in the morning over my, Cuban espresso, which is a way to jet into the orbit of the day, I miss reading good stuff, and The Athletic is a good place for that. The Undefeated at ESPN always has compelling stuff. Bill Rubin had a great piece yesterday, looking at the NCAA tournament and African-American players and the imbalance of power with, the white coaching structure and whatnot. Just things that provoke thought. And, I would encourage all consumers of news, which I mean to be any interested citizen, to read as much as you can. Watch, yes, and it's easier to watch stuff on your phone, but to read as much as you can. I've often flogged the Sunday Long Read blog, which is run by my friend Don Van Natta. And you can join at a free level, you can join at a subscriber level, but it brings together the best long-form journalism, not just sports. In fact, it started maybe half sports, and sports is maybe the least of it now. But every Sunday, it's delivered to your email inbox. And what that does is show you a number of things, especially if you're an aspiring journalist. It shows you how to write their. If you give 20 smart people the same fact sets, you're going to get 20 different treatments. And I don't think any of them are going to be wrong, but they're all going to be different. And the best of them are going to be very good. So There's no one way to tell a story. It'll expose you to a number of different web outlets you may not have come across. Now, some of them have paywalls, and you got to work your way around that, but not all of them do. And it'll also teach you how to write. One of their features each week is the lead paragraph of the week. And it's like, wow, when did that come to that person? And then again, it's, if I give you and I give 10 other, similarly smart people, here are the facts as we know them. Boom, 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 boom. And here's a little flavor and color. What kind of piece can you write? And you're going to get, that's the beauty. I mean, I'm a fan of wine. If you give the 3 vintners, the same set of grapes and the same weather conditions, they're probably going to make 3 different kinds of wine. And so it is with journalism. So it's the Sunday Long Read, and I highly recommend it because it's a living laboratory of the best ongoing journalism that's going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, kind of transitioning into more of the corporate side of ESPN, they've endured a lot of changes lately, whether it be staff wise or content wise or general direction wise as of late. That being said, do you think the company is still miles ahead of the competition and being innovative enough to stay that way? Or is the gap kind of closing between them and other sports media giants?
Oh, all the people chasing ESPN would want you to believe that they are about to, tackle them out of bounds there at the 7.
Right.
And I do, look, full disclosure, I worked there for 39 and 0.10 years, almost 40 years. But I think I'm smart enough and honest enough to factor out the emotion of it and become objective. I would much rather be ESPN in the current media environment, with its reputation, with its leadership, with its brand and its branding, with its contracts for content than any other provider. And they've had to reinvent themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Cord cutting a necessity. Yeah, there've been some well advertised, changes in focus and letting people go. For the better part of 33, 34 years, ESPN was immune to those industrial pressures. And then they came 2013, 2015, 2017. I mean, it's inevitable. It sounds cruel. It was very painful. And if I had the job running the company and I had the one question I always would, if I asked this question at a class in which you attend, you now know the answer, Ben. But I would often say, why do we turn on the lights in the morning at ESPN? Why do we open the door, unlock it, put the gate up by security and let everybody in? And folks would offer, well, make the best product, yeah, to follow the best stories, yes. But the overarching reason and the first reason and the fundamental reason is to make money for the shareholders of the Walt Disney Company. I mean, that's why we're in a capitalist society until that's changed, and who knows. And so you have to accept that fact, and you have to adapt to the marketplace. And the higher education is going through this right now. Seton Hall is not immune. Any school, especially a private university of a certain scale or size or endowment, is realizing the challenges. I mean, Dr. Nyers did an extraordinary job negotiating, Seton Hall's way through the COVID reality and into this new educational reality. But again, it gets back to seeing over the horizon, anticipating what the iceberg is, and not stopping for ice cubes.
Right. And I think with some of those newer practices that have had to be brought into play and adapted to, kind of within the sports media landscape, what new ideas and kind of new things that have become rather standard in the 21st century do you think have kind of left the biggest impact? And like, what modern developments at ESPN did you take the most notice of?
Whole bunch of questions here. Well, one of the things, and it's industry wide, and it's a function of the delivery and the technologies that have grown up, which is the ability of athletes to past the media.
Right.
Witness the Players Tribune, which who knows at the end of the day may make more money for Derek Jeter than a share of the Marlins. I doubt that the Marlins are actually going to come out of this cultural reset and do well. As I said, I talked about the lack of trust in the media and the ability for athletes to market themselves, to sell themselves, to tell their own story without having to submit to the media. That's important, and you see that in joint enterprises that networks engage in with athletes. I mean, LeBron through Spring Hill Productions, I believe is the name of this company, if I'm not mistaken. He and Maverick Carter, content providers. My good friend and former colleague Jamel Hill, content provider, with TV interests, via aforementioned podcasts. So there is so much content that athletes now and leagues with their own channels, NFL and NHL, NBA, MLB, can put it out there their way. That's not to say it's going to be total spin, absent from the truth or anything like that. But they get to put their copyright on it their way. And so now it comes up to the discerning consumer at home to say, watch everything critically. That's always my advice. When you're consuming media, just don't consume it and chew and wash it down. Savor
Right.
it like a wine and say, where's this from? What's their dog in this fight? Are they reputable? And do some own fact checking, because, media outlets have reputations, and it only takes one slip to lose it.
Yeah, my friends and I have kind of talked about how being able to analyze and look at what you're watching from a bigger picture and what you're consuming from a bigger picture is important to understand kind of why these pieces of media, whether it be journalistic writing or broadcast content, is you need to be able to understand not only the content that they're showing you, but why it's being portrayed in certain ways. And I think it's
Yeah,
important to be able to digest that.
exactly. Especially now that so much media, quote unquote, objective media, um, accepts the injection of opinion into the narrative, and and a point of view. Used to be like, if you in the old days of Sports Illustrated, back when Sports Illustrated was really Sports Illustrated, not the shell of what it is now. And you'd have one, and then I'm going to sound like, I'm telling all you digital kids to get off my digital lawn. And I don't even mean to sound like that at all. But Sports Illustrated would arrive every Monday or Tuesday in your mailbox. And if you were, like yourself or myself back when I was younger,
Mhm.
consumer of sports media, wanting to get into the field, you would just grab it and absorb it. If you love good writing, you would go for what they call the back of the book
Yeah.
piece, where guys like Gary Smith, the late Frank DeFord, um, you name it, Bill Mack, all primarily guys and all primarily white guys at the time, and that was the industry. Um, but they would give you a 10, 15,000 word take on a person. I mean, DeFord's piece in 1981 on Bobby Knight, called "The Rabbit Hunter," which you'll notice 40 years later, I can tell you almost the week that it ran, because it ran just before I covered Knight in person for the first time ever reading, is definitive literature. And but that's opinion. That's back there. You're reading analysis, and that there are other pieces there that you're reading, like watching SportsCenter through the years. That when it's an important fact-based story, there won't be an injection of opinion. If you want opinion, we're going to go to an analyst. And there's going to be, all right, now we're leaving this, we're going to analysis. But these days, it all gets commingled. And now your job as a consumer is to, take the spaghetti threads apart and say, okay, that's fact, that's analysis.
Do you think the sports news cycle is too fast to truly have as introspective of journalism done on certain topics as possible in the past?
Oh my gosh, the whole news cycle is lightning fast. The cancel culture can get somebody on the street in 24 to 48 hours if they choose to.
Hmm.
Um, but it's so the whole volatility of the news cycle, especially if it disturbs a preconceived narrative, or if it's close to a third rail topic, it just inflames the situation. So it's not just sports, and the answer is yes, and that's why you need to have those outlets, those platforms, uh, those entities that have a reputation, where it's like, well, that person's going to say, or that entity is going to say something, and they're going to take a deep breath, and they're not just going to traffic in the latest gossip. Um, it can be done. Uh, Hopefully, there's still a place in the marketplace for stuff like that.
Right. Now, lightening up a little bit.
Oh, we weren't giggling and laughing so far? I'm sorry.
Well,
I missed the soundtrack. Oh, the laughter. Yeah, that's
we've
okay.
had our laughs throughout. We just got real serious for a
Yeah,
minute.
I know. I know.
We were on the same page. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
What do you think was the most interesting or memorable experience you had outside of the broadcast booth while kind of being able to cover international soccer, will it be on the World Cup stage or another? What are some of your favorite experiences and memories you've been able to have while covering international
Oh,
soccer?
wow. International soccer. Seeing the world on somebody else's dime is a pretty neat trick. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've been to Estadio Azteca in Mexico City 3 times. Once when the United States beat Mexico back in 2012, and we had to finish our game under umbrellas because we hoped that was beer in the cups they were throwing at us. Same color as other stuff. To stand in the Stade de France in Saint Denis, France, just north of Paris, as the French were about to play Brazil for the World Cup final, and to hear 80,000 Frenchmen sing the Marseillaise will make the hair stand up on your arm, whether you've seen the movie Casablanca or not. And if you haven't, I urge you to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the most surreal moments in my life was thanks to covering the World Cup. And what we did in South Africa in 2010 was, I believe, was epic. We changed a lot. We put more resources and talent and desire to achieve understanding into that than anything else I've ever been associated with. I made 3 trips to the country. I probably spent a total of 3 months in country. And then on the last trip, which was for the actual tournament back in June and July of 2010, in the middle of the tournament, boss calls me and says, "We got it. They'll see us." So I'm on a plane down to Cape Town from Johannesburg. It's about a 2-hour flight to interview Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty neat. And we get to a strip mall in Cape Town, which is a topographically gorgeous city, but it's got all sorts of issues, as you know. Nearly ran out of water about a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in this strip mall, an unprepossessing strip mall not far from the water in Cape Town, there's the Archbishop's office. You walk in, and it's a very ordinary office, but there are awards everywhere, just kind of sitting, waiting to be filed. I mean, this is a man who won the Nobel Peace Prize. And to those not familiar with his work, through the fight against apartheid in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, of course, Madiba as he's known there, was imprisoned on Robben Island off the coast of Cape Town, several miles. He was inside, and through the latter part of his 26-year time in prison, I mean, he was essentially a free man, but in the prison and trying to work with the government and getting out of this mess, which was apartheid. He was Mr. Inside. Mr. Outside was Desmond Tutu. And every time this man, who was the Archbishop of the Anglican Church in Cape Town, would go in public, he would take his life in his hands. It was a very, very violent time in South Africa, and I don't think Americans have an understanding. To spend any amount of time there to see what is accepted as the baseline of violence in Africa's most advanced country still is to see it's a very violent society to this day. And so Archbishop Tutu receives us on the day that South Africa were playing their last group game. They were playing France, and they had a chance of advancing. And the Archbishop walks in, and he does not stand tall physically. He's perhaps 5 feet. He's wearing the Bafana Bafana jersey. He's wearing the national jersey, and he's wearing what they call the makarapa, which is a miner's helmet. And that's because in Africa, South Africa, rugby was the white sport. Football, soccer was the black sport. And black soccer fans for years would wear their miner's helmets straight from the mines out to the games, and the makarapa. Then it became something you'd wear for decoration. Mm-hmm. So, hey, Archbishop, is it possible you could take the makarapa off or begin to, you need to get the lighting right and see? That's fine. And we're all in this office. It couldn't have been more than 15 by 10 feet, maybe. He leans in and he says, "I have a question to ask you." And I said, "Yes." He says, "Before we begin, would you mind if I offered a brief non-denominational prayer?" Now, here's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. I mean, who am I to say no to this?
Right.
And so everyone just bowed their heads, and it was incredibly moving. And there were white South Africans, black South Africans, our crew. This was being sent back live to Johannesburg. They're also taping it. And it's just an amazing moment. And then to sit with him for the better part of a half hour. He had lived for several years in Atlanta. We're totally familiar with the American civil rights landscape, the importance of Joe Louis and Jackie Robinson, etc. But it was a fascinating conversation at a time when this World Cup was taking his nation and holding it up to the world as an example of a multiracial democracy that has its rough patches, but it still works. And it still works, and it's still better than what they had. And that whole experience was insanely meaningful.
That's an amazing story and just incredible experience. I'm
Yeah.
so happy you've been able to tell me this today. So
Sure.
that's
No problem.
absolutely incredible. But lastly, simply, what's been your favorite thing about retired life? I mean, have you been able to pick anything?
Yeah, I got 2 granddaughters, and that's the important thing. And in a certain way, the pandemic, which came not far, long after I started really my formal retirement, kind of proscribed what you were able to do.
Right.
But the ability to read a lot more for pleasure, to see friends, to plan some travel now that we're going to do since the pandemic seems to be taking its foot off the accelerator. My wife and I are fully vaccinated for a while now, so it's not.
As mine, yeah.
Oh, great. But it's and also to spend the time working with Professor Schechter at the Hall and working on some initiatives there. Those are the important things. And I miss the people I used to work with. I don't miss getting up when I was doing the daily OTL show. It'd be getting up about 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd live around 45 minutes from work, and that commute would get old after a while. But you remember the people, and proud of what we were able to do. And I think it's important to pass on what we think if we can offer anything from our experiences, those of us who worked for so long, to help those that want to do what we're doing. As I said, at the retail level, one-on-one, answer questions. I think that's very important. I think it's most effective rather than just, yelling it from a mountain, but having interpersonal contact.
100%. And I personally, and I know others, appreciate your recognition of that and being able to share your time helping out student media just like this and in other examples that we've talked about here at the Hall. But that's going to be all for Clarity Stripes interview with Bob Ley of ESPN. I'm Ben Harris. Thank you so much.